Alright, in this lesson I'll introduce an alternate syntax that we can use to change our pandas options. So let's begin by executing our code from the previous lesson to load our randomly generated NumPy based data frame. And there it is, and we can also see our settings that we set in the last lesson, particularly those max columns limited to 8, are still present. So how can we use methods to change our options? Well, there's actually a whole family of methods that are available here. There's 4 that I'd like to introduce in this lesson, and they are getOption, setOption, resetOption, and describeOption. So let's first talk about getOption. It's called directly on the pandas library, so we're going to do pd.getOption, and there is an underscore there. It is a method, so it requires a pair of parentheses at the end, and the single argument that you give it is the option name whose value you want to access. So for example, if I want to get the current value for the max rows setting, I can write max rows in quotes, and there is that underscore there, and it's going to tell me that that current option is set to 4 max rows. Similarly, if I want the max columns, I can do pd.getOption and write in max columns in quotes. And I can see here that the maximum number of outputted columns is set to 8, as we can see visually up here. Of course, the complementary method to this is setOption. So what I can do is write pd.setOption. My first argument is going to be the exact same. It's going to be the setting that I want to modify. So let's say I want to change the max rows. And let's say I want to do 16 now. When I execute this and take a look at df, you can see that we've successfully changed that setting, and it's now outputting 8 rows above the truncation, 8 rows below, for a total of 16. Similarly, I can change this to something like max columns, and let's say I want 20 max columns. I'm going to execute this, re-execute my df, and you can see it's changed that display setting to show me 20 max columns. Two things that I want to quickly dive into here. First, this is the exact same process as if we were to access this specific attribute and overwrite it. For example, here we set our max columns to 20, and I can actually show you that if I navigate to pd.options.display.maxColumns, you can see that it's properly returning 20. So these methods and attributes can be worked with interchangeably. You can do one, then the other. One will modify the other, and so on and so forth. It's really whichever approach you prefer to solving the problem. And of course, if I do something like setting the max columns back to something like 10, and then I do pd.getOption and put in max columns, you can see that it's going to properly give me 10 back. So they work hand in hand with each other. The other great thing about getOption and setOption is that they are built to utilize regular expressions, which basically means they'll try to figure out what option you're referring to even if you don't type it exactly correctly. So for example, if I made a typo here and I typed my A and X here in capitals, it would still be able to figure out that I'm referring to max columns. Now with that said, even though pandas is a bit flexible here, I strongly recommend that you stick with the official way of writing an option. The way you can access that, of course, is just by going to pdoptions.display and then pressing something like tab to see what all the names are. You can see for the most part they're all, looks like, completely lowercase with just the underscores separating them. So you should generally stick with this approach. Relying on regular expressions and relying on pandas to figure out what you're referring to is generally a dangerous strategy, so I wouldn't recommend it, but just know that it is built in there for you to give you a little bit of freedom. So we've talked about setOption and getOption. Let's now talk about resetOption, which is obviously going to do exactly as its name suggests. It takes an option and it reverts it back to its default setting. So let's say I want to bring back my original output, and I totally forgot how many rows pandas outputs by default and how many columns pandas outputs by default. So I know the two names of my options are max columns and max rows, but I don't remember their default values. Well, we have a convenient resetOption method called again on the pandas library. And we can provide a parentheses and give it an argument of the option that we want to return back to its default regular setting. So if I do max rows, execute that, and then do something like getOption and put in max rows, we can see that it's changed it back to its default, which is 60. Similarly, if I do max columns, execute that, and then get the option again with the getOption method, we can see the default is 20 columns, 60 rows by 20 columns. And finally, the fourth method here is describeOption, which of course outputs documentation that describes a little bit about what that option does in the context of pandas. So for example, let's say I completely forgot what max rows and max columns do. What I can do is just do pd.describeOption. There's also an underscore there. open my parentheses, and let's say max columns. And it's going to tell me if the max columns is exceeded. It's going to switch to a truncated view. It's going to give me a little bit more detail. And the other helpful part below here is it's going to tell me the default value as well as the currently set value. So this method kind of accomplishes a lot of different things and combines pieces of information that may be relevant to you. Instead of writing get option, you can always just do describe option, and you're going to get the current value right here. You're going to get the default value right here. So it may save you a few lines of code to simply do describe option. And also maybe if you're writing something like a Jupyter Notebook or somebody else to analyze, and you're trying to explain what you did as far as manipulating the options, showing the documentation may be a particularly effective thing to give a person a sense of how it is that you're modifying your settings. So describe option just basically loads the documentation directly below the cell as the output. So these four methods, get option, set option, reset option, and describe option, work hand in hand in changing the pandas options. You can use this approach. You can use the dot syntax approach with the attributes as we explored in the previous lesson, or of course use both. That's the best way to learn and commit these to memory as quickly as possible. But that's how you change pandas options with methods.